Has someone ever taken credit for your work in the family?
I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I was proud of myself. I bought the car on my own. No cosigner, no handout, no weird deal where someone helped and reminded me of it forever. Just me, my credit score, and a stack of documents I read twice before signing. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and it still had that new car smell when I parked it in my parents' driveway for Easter weekend. I didn't expect balloons or applause, but I did expect anyone, to say something like, "Hey, that's impressive." Instead, Mom handed me a grocery list and asked if I could go get more soda. And when the champagne came out for the toast, it wasn't for me. It was for Tyler. Tyler had just accepted some job at a startup. No benefits, no salary yet, just equity and a promise. But to my parents, that was genius-level ambition. Mom called him our little disruptor, and Dad said, "He's got that hunger." Like Elon Musk. I stood there holding a bag of ice I'd just dragged in from the trunk, my hands freezing, and listened to them go on and on about a job he hadn't even started. They didn't even look at me. I smiled through it. That's what I do. I've learned to swallow the irritation, let it settle into my stomach, and nod like I agree. I told myself, "You're not a child, don't make it about you." But later that night, when I stepped outside for air, I saw Tyler leaning against my car. He tossed me the keys like he was doing me a favor. I blinked. "You drove it?" I asked. He gave that cocky half-laugh he always does when he knows he's gotten away with something. "You weren't using it." I took the keys and said nothing. The next morning, he was gone. My car? Still in the driveway, but now the front bumper had a deep dent and the side mirror was dangling by a wire. It looked like someone had sideswiped a pole, then pretended it didn't happen. I just stared at it. My stomach dropped in that slow, sinking way that starts with disbelief and ends in fury. My first instinct was to walk inside and scream, but I didn't. I stood there in the cold and told myself to breathe. To think. I grabbed my phone to take pictures, but then I saw it, something folded under the windshield wiper. It was a repair estimate from a local body shop. Sloppy handwriting. Partial total. And at the bottom, Tyler's full name in the customer field, followed by a signature that looked rushed and smug. No one leaves a paper trail like that unless they think it won't matter. Unless they know Mom and Dad will cover for them. I didn't say anything at breakfast. Dad asked me to pick up bagels. Mom wanted me to help clean up the dining room. Tyler was still gone, probably sleeping it off at someone's place. I stared at my eggs and thought, you don't get to explode. Not yet. I folded the estimate and tucked it into my purse. When Tyler finally showed up late that afternoon, he came through the front door like he owned the place. No apology, no explanation, just a grunt as he grabbed a soda and flopped onto the couch. I waited. He didn't say anything. I cleared my throat and said, "About my car." He didn't even look at me. "You shouldn't leave it unlocked," he said, like I was the one who did something wrong. Dad chuckled. "He's just teasing you." And Mom added, "It's just a car, honey. Don't be dramatic." That word. Dramatic. That's what they always say when I point out something real. When I push back or call out the obvious. It's their favorite tool. Turn my logic into emotion so they don't have to take it seriously. I bit the inside of my cheek until it hurt. I drove home that night with one headlight busted and the bumper scraping slightly every time I hit a bump. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just drove with the windows down and the radio off, because I didn't want to be distracted. I needed to think. The next morning, I called the number on the repair slip. A man named Mr. Leland picked up. I asked if I could come by. He said sure. When I got there, he was already waiting. He asked if I was the girl whose brother ghosted the bill. I told him I guess so. He brought out the full repair estimate. Same handwriting, same signature. He said Tyler dropped the car off, said he was covering it himself, then stopped answering calls. I looked at the total. It was more than I expected, but not out of reach. I asked him if I could pay it. He looked at me sideways, like he was testing something, and said, "Cash or card?" I paid. Then I asked one last question. "Would you be willing to write up a copy with the original intake form?" He paused. "Already printed it out," he said. "Looks like you'll need it." I walked out with that envelope in my hand and a plan forming in my head. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't even going to accuse him. But I was going to wait for the exact right moment, the one where everyone would see it. All of it. And then I'd simply hand it over. Because Tyler may think no one will ever let me blame him. But he signed his name. And that signature? That's where this story really begins. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset in the way my parents would have accused me of being sensitive, reactive, emotional, but because I was focused. I laid there, eyes wide open, going over the sequence in my head like I was building a case. Tyler drove my car without permission, damaged it, then left it in the driveway like a dumped shopping cart. When asked, he smirked and deflected blame, like always. And my parents, so deeply conditioned to believe he could do no wrong, wrote the whole thing off as a harmless misunderstanding. But what they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that he'd left a fingerprint. And not just metaphorically. He left his actual signature. By morning, I was back at the repair shop. I had decided not to tell anyone where I was going, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I already knew that the second I said the word signature, my parents would leap into action, not to hold Tyler accountable, but to get ahead of it and protect him. They always had a way of making my evidence disappear beneath a blanket of excuses. He didn't mean it. He was just trying to help. Don't be petty. But this time, I wasn't interested in arguing with them. I wasn't looking for them to agree. I just wanted the facts printed, stapled, and ready. Mr. Leland greeted me with a nod like he'd already read my entire family history in one glance. He walked me through the repair notes, when the car was dropped off, what Tyler told him, and the estimate they gave him, which, of course, he never responded to. He even showed me the text messages they'd sent, unanswered, and the voicemails no one returned. It was clear Tyler assumed the problem would fix itself, or that I'd just quietly pay and move on. And I almost did, until I realized that not responding was exactly what he counted on. I asked Mr. Leland if he could compile everything, the intake form, the estimate, the work order with the vehicle details, and most importantly, the signed authorization form. He didn't hesitate. He walked into the back and 10 minutes later returned with a manila folder, neatly labeled with my last name. The packet was more thorough than I expected, which made me feel like maybe I wasn't the only one Tyler had tried to charm and abandon. I paid the remaining amount, even though it stung to drop that much money on damage I didn't cause, and thanked Mr. Leland for keeping records. He gave me a look that lingered just long enough to suggest this wasn't the first time he'd watched a woman clean up a mess her brother left behind. I tucked the folder under my arm and left without another word. The entire drive home, I rehearsed what I might say when the moment came, but part of me hoped I wouldn't have to say much at all. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted clarity. I wanted my parents to sit with the truth long enough that it actually registered as real, not just something they could brush off with that tired smile they always used when I called out Tyler's behavior. For once, I wanted them to see the paper, read the date, recognize the signature, and realize that the person they defend isn't a kid anymore. He's a grown man who lies, uses people, and laughs when he's caught. When I got home, Tyler was in the kitchen making scrambled eggs like nothing had happened. He looked at me and said, "You're welcome for the gas." I didn't respond. I just walked past him and into my room, holding the folder like a loaded weapon. I didn't want to waste the reveal on a casual moment. This needed to land in front of an audience. He didn't know it yet, but I was waiting for a stage. That stage came faster than I expected. 2 days later, Mom texted me asking if I could come to the house again. Apparently, they were hosting a cookout for Tyler to celebrate his new beginnings. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide whether I had it in me to show up, smile, and act like nothing happened. But then I thought of the smirk on Tyler's face when he tossed me my keys, and the absolute confidence he had that no one would ever hold him accountable. And suddenly, I wasn't tired anymore. I texted back one word, "Sure." I spent the next evening preparing everything. I scanned the repair documents into a clean PDF and saved it on my phone. I printed a physical copy and slid it into a new envelope. I even looked up the airdrop settings on my phone, just in case I needed to share something quickly. I wasn't sure which version of the truth would land hardest, but I was going to be ready for all of them. That night, I stood in front of my mirror and practiced saying one line. Are you sure you want to talk about that in front of everyone? It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't mean. It was just a question. But I knew that if I said it at the right moment, with the right evidence in hand, it would hit him like a truck. Because the truth is, Tyler didn't just crash my car. He crashed into the lie my parents had been protecting all these years, the idea that he was harmless, that his mistakes were lovable, that I was always just overreacting. And by signing that form, by putting his name down in ink, he did the one thing none of us ever expected him to do. He gave me proof. And I was going to use it. The morning of the cookout arrived with that specific kind of tension you don't see but feel in your chest, the kind where your body knows you're about to walk into something fake, but you've convinced your face to look polite. I pulled into my parents' driveway just as Tyler's voice carried from the backyard, loud and easy, like nothing in his life had ever really gone wrong. He was holding court already, leaning back in a plastic chair, sunglasses on, telling some inflated version of a story about quitting his last job on principle. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a second, watching him perform for people who genuinely believed him. That was always his gift. He didn't need facts, just confidence. And my parents mistook that confidence for capability every single time. Inside, Mom was chopping vegetables, and when she saw me, she smiled like nothing had happened, like I hadn't called her 3 days ago asking if Tyler planned to pay for the damages. She'd said, "Let's not do this, okay? It's just a misunderstanding." Then she followed it with her classic line, "You've always had a strong reaction to things." The implication was clear. The problem wasn't that Tyler wrecked my car. The problem was that I wouldn't let it go. Now she was slicing cucumbers and humming to herself like we hadn't had that conversation. She motioned toward the backyard and said, "Try not to bring up the car, all right? This is supposed to be fun." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how familiar the script was. Don't make waves. Don't draw attention. Don't ruin the mood. I asked her what mood she was talking about. She didn't answer. I stepped outside, kept my tone neutral, and took a seat near the cooler. Tyler didn't even glance in my direction. His girlfriend, some new one, I didn't catch her name, sat next to him, laughing too hard at his stories. He turned the volume up as he saw more people arrive, slipping into that version of himself that always looked a little too smooth. I let him have it. I didn't interrupt. I wanted the stage to be his. I needed the gap between perception and reality to stretch as far as it could before I cut it in half. But I wasn't just sitting there quietly. I had my phone in my hand, and I was scrolling not through texts or social media, but through his public posts. Tyler was reckless, but he was also arrogant. I'd remembered something from earlier that week, and I was right. There it was. A short Instagram story, probably posted and deleted later, where he was behind the wheel of my car, music blasting, speeding down a street I didn't recognize. He was alone, holding his phone in one hand, the wheel in the other, grinning like a child who thinks he's untouchable. The caption? "She'll never know smiling face with horns." I saved the video before he could delete it again. At some point during the cookout, Dad came over to where I was sitting and handed me a plate. He asked how work was going, and I gave him a vague answer. I wasn't about to start a discussion with him because he had this way of pretending to listen while also framing everything in Tyler's favor. If I said I was tired, he'd say, "You work too hard," like always, which sounded like concern but was really a dig. If I said I was frustrated, he'd ask, "Why do you let things get to you so easily?" Every path ended with me being the problem, the wayward daughter who couldn't just relax and be happy like Tyler. I nodded along, but my eyes were on my brother. He had slipped into a new story, one about how he'd handled a situation with someone's car and stepped up. My stomach turned. He was actually retelling the incident, rewriting it on the spot, painting himself as the guy who took responsibility for a friend's car getting dinged. The audience loved it. His girlfriend was wide-eyed with admiration. A few of my cousins laughed. Mom nodded like she was proud. I stood up, walked into the house, and opened the envelope I'd brought. I double-checked the documents, making sure the signature was visible, the dates aligned, and the shop's letterhead was clear. Then I pulled out my phone and rewatched the video. I didn't want to rush it. I wanted everything to fall into place at the right moment, not out of spite, but out of necessity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. It was about stopping the cycle. As I walked back outside, I caught a few people turning toward me. Tyler saw me approaching and gave that smirk, the one that said, "Are you seriously going to do this here?" I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I sat down again, set the envelope on the table in front of me, and left it there. He glanced at it but didn't move. That hesitation, that flicker of recognition in his eyes, told me everything. He knew what it was. He knew what was coming. My mom noticed and immediately stepped between us with a tray of drinks. She placed them on the table, glanced at the envelope, and then looked at me with that familiar warning expression. Not anger. Just fear of disruption, fear of having to admit they might have been wrong. She said quietly, "Please don't do this now." I looked her in the eyes and replied, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just setting something down." Because the truth was, I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to raise my voice or prove anything with a speech. I had proof. I had the video. I had the documents. I had the paper trail. And I had waited long enough. Now, I just needed to wait for the right crack, the one where the performance faltered and the reality bled through. And I could already see it forming in the corner of Tyler's mouth, where his smirk had started to twitch. I've learned something about people like Tyler. They don't panic in private because they know there's always time to talk their way out of things behind closed doors. What scares them is exposure. Not confrontation. Exposure. The kind they can't laugh through, the kind they can't rewrite, the kind that shows up in front of the exact people they spend their lives trying to impress. That afternoon, I decided not to raise my voice, not to accuse or demand or plead. I didn't come to the cookout to ask for justice. I came to let the truth sit in front of everyone like a lit fuse, waiting for him to make one more arrogant move so I could strike the match. Tyler kept talking. I could see the gears in his head turning. He knew the envelope was there, and he knew I hadn't placed it in front of just him. It was on the table between us, like a question that hadn't been asked yet. He tried to steer the conversation back toward himself, cracking jokes, throwing out half-stories with just enough truth to keep the audience engaged. But the rhythm was off now. His laugh was half a second too quick. His hands, normally relaxed and fluid when he talked, kept fidgeting. He glanced at me between sentences, and I didn't even blink. I just waited. Eventually, my dad wandered over and asked what we were all talking about. Someone, I think one of my cousins, tried to summarize Tyler's story about helping a friend with car stuff, but they couldn't quite explain the details because Tyler hadn't given any. Dad, of course, chuckled and clapped Tyler on the back like he'd just shared some profound lesson about responsibility. Then he looked at me and said, "See? He's not a bad guy. Just needs a little guidance sometimes." It was that moment, that tone, that did it. The way my father, even without knowing the full story, instinctively rushed to pad the ground beneath my brother like he always had, while I was expected to stand up on my own and not fall. That quiet dismissal, spoken like it was wisdom, flipped a switch in my chest. I reached into my bag, pulled out the repair bill, and set it gently beside the envelope. "I'd love your opinion on something," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is from the body shop that fixed my car. You'll see it has Tyler's name on the customer line and his signature at the bottom." The table went still. Not tense, not shocked, just quiet, like someone had paused the music at the exact wrong moment. Tyler leaned back, trying to smile, but it didn't land. "That's not what it looks like," he started, already slipping into the language of people who know they're caught. Dad reached for the paper. He didn't speak at first. He read the top page, flipped it, then flipped it again. When he got to the intake form, the one with the signature, he glanced up at Tyler and narrowed his eyes just slightly. "You signed for repairs on her car?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Not angry. Just puzzled. Tyler shrugged in a way that was supposed to look casual. "I was gonna take care of it. I didn't finish. I mean, she got it fixed anyway." That was the pivot. The deflection. The subtle attempt to drag me into the mud with him, to imply that we both knew the game and had agreed on the rules. I let it hang there for a second, then said, I got it fixed because the shop called me. They said you ghosted them. And I paid the full amount myself. But sure, tell them how you were gonna handle it. I didn't yell. I didn't even sound angry. If anything, I sounded bored, like I'd said it all before, and in a way I had. Not this exact story, but the pattern. The setup. The escape act. And my parents had bought it every time. My mother, who had been watching from a few steps away, finally walked over. She picked up the paper, skimmed it quickly, then looked at me with a face I couldn't quite read, a mix of worry and embarrassment, like she was trying to do the math and couldn't make the numbers add up. Why didn't you just tell us this earlier? She asked. I looked straight at her and replied, because I knew you wouldn't believe me until you saw it. She didn't respond. She just stared at the page, then at Tyler, who was now avoiding everyone's eyes. The crowd that had once orbited him with admiration had backed off slightly. Not out of outrage, not yet, but with that hesitant discomfort people feel when they're not sure which side of the story they're supposed to be on. And then I played the last card. I pulled out my phone, opened the saved video, and hit play. Tyler's voice, loud and stupid, filled the backyard speakers through the Bluetooth he hadn't realized was still connected earlier when he'd been showing off his playlist. His face was right there on screen, in my car, flooring the gas, laughing, captioned with the words, "She'll never know." Every conversation stopped. Someone coughed. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Tyler reached for the phone, but I pulled it back before he could touch it. I saved it before you deleted it, I said, almost gently. And I've already backed it up. For the first time in a long time, no one said anything in his defense. Not even my parents. Not because they were siding with me, not yet, but because they didn't know how to explain what they were looking at. There was no plausible spin left, no comforting version of the story where Tyler was just misunderstood. He stood there, frozen, watching the last seconds of the video loop. And I knew from the way his jaw tightened, from the way his hands dropped to his sides, that he wasn't just embarrassed. He was cornered. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him and said, next time you borrow something that isn't yours, maybe don't sign your name to the damage. Then I turned, walked back inside, and left the envelope on the table, not as a threat, but as a record. Because in the end, it only took one sheet of paper to end the performance. In the hours that followed, I noticed something subtle begin to shift, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the quiet tension that lingered in the silences between conversations. People still milled around the yard, still held plates of food and plastic cups and tried to act as if everything was normal, but the air had changed. Tyler didn't speak much after the video played. He disappeared into the house for a while, maybe trying to regroup or think of a version of the story he could spin that would still protect whatever image he thought he had left. But the problem was that this time, there was no narrative left to manipulate, no misunderstanding to lean on, no one to feed lines to. The evidence didn't require interpretation. It didn't ask for belief. It simply existed, and it was loud in the way facts are when they're undeniable. My parents didn't say much either. My mother kept herself busy in the kitchen, rearranging already arranged dishes, wiping down counters that were already clean, pretending she hadn't seen the way the room went silent when Tyler's voice echoed out of the speakers. My father sat in the backyard, nursing a drink and staring at a patch of grass like it might offer him a way to rewind the last hour. Occasionally, he'd glance at me, then quickly look away, as if he couldn't decide whether to be ashamed, relieved, or just stunned that I hadn't exploded the way they were always so sure I would. I had nothing left to prove. That was the strange part. I'd spent years feeling like I had to justify my frustration, like I needed to explain every feeling with a footnote and a second source. They'd trained me to second-guess myself so well that sometimes I even believed I was overreacting. But now, with the bill in their hands and the video replaying in their heads, I felt none of that weight. Not because they had apologized, they hadn't, not yet, but because the balance had finally tipped. I had said the bare minimum and let the truth speak for itself. And it had landed harder than any speech I could have made. Later that evening, as the last of the guests made their awkward exits and the patio lights flickered on, my mom approached me near the sink, her voice quiet like she was afraid someone else might overhear. She didn't try to justify what had happened. She didn't scold me for making a scene or ask why I hadn't come to her first. Instead, she just asked, "Why didn't you show us that video before?" Her eyes looked tired, not from the party, but from the slow realization that something fundamental had shifted in how the family operated, and she'd missed the moment it cracked. I met her gaze and answered without hesitation. "Because you would have told me to delete it. You would have said it would make things worse." And I meant it. Because every time I'd brought a problem to them before, they hadn't solved it. They'd smoothed it over, swept it away, rewritten it. And this time, I didn't want a revision. I wanted it to sit there, unchangeable. She didn't deny it. She just nodded and walked away. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd leave that house with silence ringing in my ears and go back to my life where I didn't have to fight to be believed. But just before I reached the door, my father called my name. He was standing near the dining table, holding the envelope I had left earlier, his fingers pressing the edges like he wasn't sure if he wanted to hand it back or keep it. "I can transfer you the money for the repairs," he said, voice low and deliberate. "If that helps make it right." I paused for a moment, not because I didn't want the money, God knows I could have used it, but because I needed him to understand that money wasn't the part that had needed fixing. "It's not about the money," I replied. "It's about who you always assumed was telling the truth." And then I added, "Keep the envelope. Maybe next time, read it sooner." He didn't argue. He just looked down at the paper again, then gave the smallest nod I'd ever seen from him. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest I'd gotten. The next day, Tyler texted me. Not to apologize. Not to offer to pay. Not even to defend himself. Just a single line, "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. "I didn't have to. You did that yourself when you crashed my car and laughed in my face." He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. That was the thing about people like Tyler, they run out of words when there's nothing left to twist. They get quiet when the room no longer gives them the benefit of the doubt. And that silence, for once, wasn't mine to carry. I didn't tell anyone else what happened. I didn't post about it, didn't share the video again, didn't bring it up with cousins or friends or anyone who might have expected me to brag. Because I didn't need to be right in public. I just needed to be right in that room, in that moment, in front of the people who had doubted me most. And I was. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to explain my anger, didn't have to defend my reaction, didn't have to outtalk the excuses. I had let the truth walk in, drop a single sheet of paper on the table, and take over. Tyler wasn't laughing anymore. My parents were thinking twice. And me? I walked out of that house without a raised voice, without a single tear, and without looking back. Because when the game ends and the mask drops, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is absolutely nothing.